Hello, my name is Lois and welcome to this reading vlog, this kind of winter vibes video where I share how my reading is going, but also maybe just some clips of any wintry things that I've been up to recently. And now, because the end of the year is coming up, I've kind of planned which Christmas books I want to read, and in order to have time to read those books in December, I wanted to pick something to read now that I felt confident that I could get through before December comes and I want to read those Christmassy books. So I posted on my YouTube community thing probably about a week ago with some books that I was trying to decide between, and in the end I've gone with Perelandra by C.S Lewis. So I picked this book for a few reasons. It is a nice length, it's about 300 pages, but also I've been trying to read the C.S Lewis Space Trilogy, which this is the second part of, for a while, and my brother has now gone and read all three of them in a couple of months, so now I feel like I need to get back on to trying to get through the trilogy. Also, I've been kind of missing reading like a full C.S Lewis book, because this year I've been reading a C.S Lewis devotional, which each page is a section from one of his non-fiction works. So I've kind of been going through a lot of his works, but just with like tiny snapshots from the different books. So I decided I wanted to go through a whole book, but by reading one of his fiction works, I feel like I'm not going to get confused between what I'm reading in the devotional and what I'm reading in the other book. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. I started it yesterday and I've read the first chapter. I had to be quite disciplined with myself because, as I say, I'm really struggling with my concentration, with my focus, but I said to myself at first, right, I'm just going to read 10 pages, and then I got to 10 pages and I thought, I'm going to keep going, I want to get through the chapter, so I read an additional 6 pages, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're struggling to start, it's good to start in a small amount. So that's going well, and now I want to try and find an audiobook to listen to. I'm not sure whether I should find something else that's fiction or maybe a non-fiction book to read. I'm not quite sure what I'm feeling. Perhaps I'll take a few more days to get into reading Perelandra and then I'll see how I feel about an audiobook. Hello, so it's another day here on my reading vlog, and I'm still going through Perelandra by C.S Lewis, the second part of the Space Trilogy, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm about 75 pages in or so. I was a little bit, I don't know what the word is, apprehensive is a bit too strong, but a few people have told me that they'd struggled with Perelandra, perhaps the most out of the 3 books in the trilogy. But so far, I think I'm perhaps finding it slightly easier than Out of the Silent Planet. Maybe it's just because I kind of know what to expect a little bit more, and I'm kind of more used to how C.S. Lewis writes A Different Planet, and I know some of the characters, so it's not quite the same intensity of having to be completely introduced to a story and the authors again from the beginning. I think it can be quite challenging in points where it's just kind of description, or the main character Ransom is on his own on the planet, because then it's just kind of description and I feel like it is a little bit slow, but now he has just met somebody else on the planet and I do find dialogue a lot easier to get through, so that is good. And so far I've not actually found the symbolism too much. I don't know if it's going to become more so throughout the book. I feel like the main thing is this idea of the Eldilla, who are kind of like Lewis's versions of angels in the book. Like, there's definitely parts of this book, and even the kind of concept of the Space Trilogy, that I can't decide whether I like or not. But it is very interesting that it is a Christian science fiction trilogy. It just calls it a science fiction trilogy, but you really can't remove the very Christian element of it. And I suppose you could say the same with Narnia, but for some reason with Narnia it feels less weird. Maybe because Narnia is so obviously like fantasy and not science fiction. And there does seem to be like an emphasis on materialism and explanation and things like that within science fiction, which feels a bit strange to be putting together with a Christian story. But I do think that it is interesting that C.S Lewis has kind of decided to do this thing about other planets, travelling to other planets, and what the planets represent. It does remind me when I saw this podcast by this guy, I think he was called Michael Ward, who's written a book called Planet Narnia, because he kind of believes that C.S Lewis used the planets, the medieval cosmology of the planets, in writing the Narnia books, and he does make a very compelling case. But one thing that I really like in a lot of Lewis's work, both in his fiction and his non-fiction, is his ability just to capture a beautiful idea or piece of wisdom and just make it really clear and make it really memorable. And so far the thing in Perelandra that has stuck out to me is his idea about being satisfied and having had enough of something and not needing to relive it again. He contrasts it to how on earth, if there's a pleasure you have, like eating something delicious or any kind of sensation, that you just want to have it again and again until it's kind of no longer pleasurable. But in Perelandra, our main character Ransom has a few experiences in which he doesn't feel this need to try and recapture it and have it again. For example, there's a few foods that he eats, and he's describing how amazing this fruit is, nothing like anything he has had on Earth, but he feels like it would be wrong to take it again and try and experience that thing again, and he just accepts that he is satisfied with having it once. And that is just a really interesting idea that I want to ponder more on. So yeah, that is where I'm at with Perelandra at the moment, but I look forward to carrying on and giving you some more updates. So, I am back. I've been filming this reading vlog for probably like a month. I don't think I've quite got the hang of it yet, but that's okay. I've been pretty busy as well because I've been working over Christmas. So I also took a trip to the Victoria and Albert Museum, or the V&A in London, and I really enjoyed it. I hadn't been to this museum before, as far as I'm aware. I think because I had some idea in my head that it was a fashion museum and that there were just going to be like dresses and stuff, which didn't really appeal to me. And then I saw somebody posted some pictures from it on Instagram a few months ago, and I was like, oh, that is not dresses and stuff, that's like art. So yeah, I went there and it was amazing actually. They had loads of medieval stuff, and that's basically just what I looked at all day. They had this, I don't know if I can call it a basement or a lower floor, and it was really quiet and it just had all this beautiful medieval things, and so it was like really relaxing because I'd been to the National History Museum and the British Museum in the summer and it was packed. It was not relaxing or enjoyable at all, so I was glad to have a better experience here. They had tapestries, they had this really cool like enchanted cup. I think it's like the only one left of a particular style or technique. And I think it said that it was supposed to have belonged to fairies. And there was this saying that went along with it, saying, if this cup should break or fall, farewell the luck of Eden Hall. Eden Hall being the place where the cup stayed at. And I just thought it was really beautiful and interesting. there were lots of these religious devotional books called the Book of Hours, and they're just so beautiful, and lots of religious art. There was this amazing 3-panel piece of, not all of it, but part of the Book of Revelation. There was this big portion from, I think it was a medieval house. There was just loads of stuff that I found actually interesting, which is not always the case at museums. So as soon as I've been talking about a few medieval stuff on here a little bit recently, I just thought I would share that. Maybe I'll have some photos as well. But on the whole, my reading is going okay. I finished Perelandra, I think that was last week, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But when I was in London as well, I decided I wanted an audiobook to listen to as I was walking around a little bit. And so I was looking up like audiobooks where it's based or set in London, and Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman came up. And I knew I had the physical book of this already at home and had been considering reading it. So I just decided to start listening to the audiobook of that, and I'm well over halfway through now, and I'm really enjoying it. It's something quite different from what I would normally choose, and if I didn't have a copy in my house for some reason, then probably I wouldn't have picked it up. But yeah, it's, I think, urban fantasy. It's set in London, and there's the normal London as we know it, and then there is London below, where the people who fall through the cracks end up. And the one I'm listening to is narrated by Neil Gaiman, and he does really good voices for all the characters. So as an audiobook, it's a really enjoyable experience, and I'm looking forward to continuing that. I've also just started reading E.T.A. Hoffmann's The Nutcracker. I have to say my actual Christmas reading is going quite slow because, well, Neverwhere's not really very Christmassy, and I've only just started this, but that's okay, hopefully I will manage. I also started listening to How to Break Up With Your Phone, an audiobook, a while ago as well, but then I kind of stopped halfway through, so I'm hoping to pick that back up because I am still really struggling with phone addiction. I'm really struggling with going on it first thing in the morning and then wasting hours, and then I'm at work and then I'm like, oh, I didn't use my free time very well. So I really do need to get back to that book too. And now for my thoughts on Perelandra by C.S Lewis, which is the second part of the Space Trilogy. In the second novel in C.S Lewis's exciting science fiction trilogy, Dr. Ransom is called to the paradise planet of Perelandra, or Venus, which turns out to be a beautiful Eden-like world. He is horrified to find that his old enemy, Dr. Weston, has also arrived and is putting him in grave peril once more. As the mad Weston's body is taken over by the forces of evil, Ransom engages in a desperate struggle to save the innocence of Perelandra. So I'm going to try and talk about Perelandra in a bit of a spoiler-free way at first before going into the details. So this is the second book in the trilogy. I have to say, I think I did enjoy it more, and I did find it a little bit easier to get through than the first book, which was Out of the Silent Planet. And Out of the Silent Planet was set on Mars, and I think the first book was a bit more science fiction, whereas Perelandra feels a little bit more maybe fantasy. I suppose Christian fantasy might be the best way to put it. So if you've read the first book and you found it a bit more difficult, then maybe you prefer this one. But if you do like that kind of more science fiction world building, maybe you would have preferred the first one and found this one more difficult. But something I liked about this book, and well, quite a few of C.S. Lewis's works as a Christian as well, is how he's attempting to kind of describe spiritual things that you can't really describe. I suppose there's quite contemplative things like trying to work out God's will, and sometimes there's things where you're not quite sure what is the right or wrong action to be taken. There are doubts, and of course there's faith when you don't know exactly what's going to happen, or things aren't looking like they're going great. I feel like there might be some more spoilers from here on, so if you have not read it and you want to, then maybe save this video for later. So Perelandra, or Venus, even on the blurb of the book, is described as an Eden-like world. So Dr. Ransom meets one inhabitant of Venus, who is a woman, and she is forbidden from going to the fixed islands. She has to stay on the floating islands. And I think this living only on the floating islands gives a sense of trusting in God, not trying to hold on to something. This sense of things kind of being temporary, and that you'll be provided with what you need at the time. And this is also kind of portrayed through the food or the fruit that's on the planet. And I think this is the case with more than one of the fruits that Ransom eats there. He describes them as being like the best thing he's ever eaten, but at the same time, like, it's satisfying, and he doesn't feel this need to keep eating more and more of it, which I suppose most of us have on Earth. If you taste something amazing, you just want to keep eating it. And then as you keep eating it, you kind of lose the satisfaction that you first had. But I suppose the fulfillment of that on this Eden-like planet is that you're just satisfied. And I thought that that was a really interesting thing. Something I've noticed for a while, especially in today's society, perhaps with like cameras and I suppose with the internet and things, there does feel like there's this need to capture things and keep hold of things forever. You can't just enjoy the moment, you have to be able to take that moment with you. And then I feel like you can be living in the past by holding on to all of these good things. And this is even addressed in the book as well. The lady says, "One goes into the forest to pick food, and already the thought of one fruit rather than another has grown up in one's mind. Then it may be one finds a different fruit, and not the fruit one thought of. One joy was expected, and another is given. The picture of the fruit you have not found is still for a moment before you, and if you wished, if it were possible, you could keep it there. You could send your soul after the good you had expected, instead of turning it into the good you had got." So I liked these quite relaxing, philosophical parts where Ransom's just having dialogue with the woman. It kind of reminded me of parts of Out of the Silent Planet, when Ransom is speaking to the different species there, and they're giving him all these valuable insights. It's very nice, but then it does get a little bit darker. So in the first book, Dr. Weston and his colleague go to Mars. They actually kidnap Ransom because they think he's going to be a human sacrifice. And they go with the aim of exploiting the planet, taking its resources, up to no good basically. And Dr. Weston now arrives again on Perelandra, or Venus. Weston now has this kind of spirituality. He starts talking about this idea of a life force that's guiding him, but there does seem to be something that is slightly off. And then after he thought Weston was either very ill, perhaps dead, Weston, or what was Weston, seems to be back and having conversations with the woman. Turns out he is possessed, either by the devil himself or a demon, and C.S. Lewis writes him so well. He is so horrifying and creepy. He is then called the Unman for the rest of the novel. There are a couple of times where you're not really sure if Weston is still in there somewhere, or if it is just this devil or demon playing a trick. You're not quite sure. Ransom starts finding these horribly tortured frogs who are just left in an absolute state, and he's feeling disgusted and pitying them, and I think he even sees the pain one is in and decides he has to end its suffering and kill it himself, and realises he only has his bare hands, and it gets quite dark. So whilst this possessed Weston, or the Unman, is torturing frogs, his main objective is persuading the woman, the lady, to disobey the commandment she's been given not to go and stay on the fixed islands. He's trying to confuse her that the commandment is actually put there for the purpose of her disobeying it, and that her disobeying it is the actual will of Maladil, or the god in this story. And the conversation, debate, persuasion, with Ransom interrupting and trying to defend God's commandment, is not going terribly well. And after this going on and on for a long time, Ransom comes to the conclusion, prayerfully I suppose you would say, that there is one solution to this. He realises that he has to kill or fight this unman to the death with his bare hands. And when I was reading this, I just did not know what to think of it, because it was so absurd. It was not at all what I would have thought in my head, like, how do you defeat the devil or a demon? Let's have a fist fight. Like, that is not what I was thinking. And Ransom is there just contemplating how he is a middle-aged scholar with no fighting experience. They don't have any weapons. They literally have to hit, bite, scratch each other until one of them is dead. And yeah, I was just so, I don't know, I like it when things surprise me, and that did surprise me. I did not pick up this book, the second book in the Space Trilogy, thinking that Ransom was going to have to physically fight a demon-possessed man. That was just not what I was thinking was going to happen. But I suppose when you think about it, the context, which to be fair is kind of referred to a little bit in the book, is like, is it the Second World War? It must be the Second World War. I kind of think that C.S. Lewis is trying to also subtly take a stance against pacifism. I have read some writings by him, like writing a case against pacifism, especially in the context of the war. So I feel like it's kind of referring to that a little bit as well, and showing that there may well be times where violence is necessary. But yeah, I don't know, it brought a smile to my face that this is what he thought of. In some ways, Perelandra does feel like slightly indulgent on C.S. Lewis's part. Like, I really think he must have had so much fun writing this. So the fight happens. Enjoy reading the fight because it's quite fun. And then I feel like quite symbolically, Ransom and the Unman end up in caves very low down. There's fire. I feel like quite clearly it's supposed to be symbolising hell. Ransom defeats the Unman and then has to climb up and gets out of the caves in this place, which is very high up on mountains, again kind of then symbolising heaven. The woman is then reunited with another inhabitant of the planet who is referred to as the king. And the king, or the Adam in the story, is also kind of described as being like the image of Christ. It was the face which no man can say he does not know. You might ask how it was possible to look upon it and not to commit idolatry, not to mistake it for that of which it was the likeness, for the resemblance was, in its own fashion, infinite, so that almost you could wonder at finding no sorrows in his brow and no wounds in his hands and feet. Yet there was no danger of mistaking, not one moment of confusion, not least sally of the will towards forbidden reverence. Where likeness was greatest, mistake was least possible. I just thought there were so many kind of gems like that in the way that C.S. Lewis managed to bring the story together and kind of point out images and symbols that, I don't know, you might not come to your mind automatically. I think because I did struggle with Out of the Silent Planet, I was a little bit put off reading this, but I'm so glad that I did pick it up. I think because the Space Trilogy is so hyped up in a lot of the areas of the internet that I frequent, I'm so glad that I am enjoying it as much as I'd hoped to. like I said, the first one I did struggle with, and a lot of people seem to say that each one gets better, so if that hideous strength is as good as or better than Perelandra, I'm sure that I'm going to really like it. And yes, if you've read the first one and were struggling, I really recommend you to just persevere. This book surprised me, it made me smile, I just really liked it. So that is Perelandra by C.S Lewis.